We're here today, myself and Sean discuss what we're going to talk about. I'm going to start by saying this as a piece. I'm not a former attorney at law, I'm still one, but I am author of textbooks, which I hope my students and practitioners still find useful. But what I really wanted to start by saying, and it is coming from my own experience from being in government, when we had the global financial crisis. I could recall just maybe a month before the crisis, the collapse occurred, a gentleman who represented Bear Stearns came in to see me and was trying to convince the government to make investments in Bear Stearns. Now, Bear Stearns, for those who don't know, is a huge financial organization, the likes of a Lehman Brothers. As we like to say, they were big in the dance. Bear Stearns collapsed in a weekend. From Friday to Monday, it collapsed. And why? Lack of confidence. So key to any economy and running any country is you have to have the confidence of the people. And part of that confidence has to come from, you may not say everything that you have to say because, you're running, you don't need to scare people, you don't need to scare off, particularly foreign investors. What you want to do is build the economy, provide the security. And so today, what I decided, and Sean thankfully agreed with me, is that I looked back at the recent announcement, and I think it had the picture, if I could recall the picture, it seemed to me like the Prime Minister was standing in the center. Am I right?
For
a picture. There's a picture of them with this meeting with the U.S. Vice President, where she undertook that they would contribute U.S. $100 million to the Caribbean.
I'm not entirely
okay, well,
sure.
in any event, I may be wrong, but it may be because the Prime Minister stands out because of his height.
Height is sometimes to do with it, right?
It's a combination of factors. But just let the goodly people know that conference was not co-hosted by our government. It was co-hosted by the Prime Minister of Bahamas, which I happen to have met, yes, when I was teaching, Prime Minister, but he was not one of my students, not at all. Prime Minister Davis, as well as the Vice President of the United States. And the committing the undertaking of the $100 million was more, if you recognize, some people have said to me, you see, they're giving $100 million. I said, excuse me, did you hear them say the word Caribbean? I think you seem to be missing that word. And a lot of the, if you read the text, and I don't want to take away anything from Trinidad, but I certainly don't want to indulge in what you call hyperbole, exaggerated speech, to give the impression that in fact, most of the financial support is understandably being given to small, vulnerable Caribbean countries that are very much impacted by climate change because their lifeblood is tourism. And as they have said, the carbon emissions that have changed the whole pattern of the climate and so on, they haven't caused it. They don't emit any gas. They're not industrialized, yet they're paying a price, which again is unfair to them. So much of the money has been channeled to those countries that have been most affected by climate change, and that means those that depend on the tourism. Trinidad, and to its credit, I have to say, we have a crime. I don't know if we knew about it before. I didn't, so I will admit to that. Crime Gun International Unit, which focuses on gun-related crimes and intelligence gathering, working together with the United States and Interpol and all the major agencies to deal with gun control. So I don't know if that has financial implications. It's probably not so much, more technical assistance, but that is what I got out of the whole thing. And that really brings me to looking at some of the things that really, I started by using the word confidence. And when, I have to be careful because one will say, well, you're being harsh, but we have to be harsh on those who run the government. I mean, if you are the one running a store or a business, am I going to look at the former owner and I might blame them in the sense that, he left the thing in a mess. But if he took over leadership, then we expect by some time, certainly 8 years later, red and ready, that you would have gotten your act together. So let's start with some of the things that we should know. One of the things, and I'm saying some of these things because when the minister speaks, the Minister of Finance speaks, I like that he likes to speak in a positive way. But I think there's a distinction between positive and giving an impression of prosperity and etc. that simply is not there. So I can give you some immediate examples. One of the things that he has said is that, you see, we reduce the debt. The debt has gone down from what it was in 2021. It's gone down. We were expecting the debt to have gone.
This is debt to GDP
Debt
ratio.
to GDP. So I'm going to explain it. Debt to GDP ratio has gone down. We were expecting 86%. Even IMF commented on that. And look at the debt to GDP in 2022. It's 70-something percent, 70% or something, much less than even we expected. Now let's understand what that really means. When you talk about GDP, it's the gross domestic products and services that your country has produced in a fiscal year put into financial terms. It's not the revenue, because the revenue is the tax on those things. So let me use a most simplified example. 2022 we know was a bumper year for Trinidad. We know that we actually had for the first time a balanced, well, nearly balanced anyhow. Well, if you ask,
the thing is, right?
It was not unbalanced.
We were told we had X amount of a deficit, and then we got more revenue, so we had a bit of a surplus or extra revenue, which cut into the deficit, so we were close to balance, except there were a lot of outstanding payments
like
to be
Paria.
made. The VAT refunds, contractors being owed, Tech is owed billions of dollars,
Sean is arguing with
etc.
me.
It's like there's so much money the government owed or government agencies
forget
owed.
about that. Receivables, and forget about that. And don't get into all those details. But anyway, coming back to the debt to GDP. So he boasted about how the debt to GDP in 2022 was 70%, much less than what was anticipated. What he's not telling you is, if the debt, let's say you had your gross domestic product, goods and services you produced in 2021 was, let's say, was $3 billion, but you owed, let's say, $1 billion. $1 billion. I'm just trying to make it as simple as possible. Obviously, your debt based on what you have produced is going to be fairly high because your debt is so high. But if in the next year, through no act on your part, because we know it was the oil and gas prices that went skyrocketing, that we saw a huge difference in our revenue take and our GDP. So let's suppose you still owed. Now you actually owed more money now, because from what I understand, the debt increased from $126 billion to $129. We actually increased our debt from 2021 to 2022. But guess what? Your debt to your GDP reduced to 70%. Why? Because you had more money. Instead of having $5 billion, maybe you had $10 billion. And the debt you owed, you increased it a little bit. But when you increased it and you look at how much the debt represents your gross domestic product, you're going to find out that it is going to be far, far less. So for the minister to boast as if what they are...
Don't forget also inflation, because you pointed this out as well.
Well, I just wanted to deal with that first.
But I mean, that also contributed to making the debt look a lot less, because inflation makes the GDP look higher, because the prices go up.
Well, that is true. But so I'm dealing with the minister's what the minister says to you. So when he makes it seem as though all is well in the land of Oz, that we are suddenly managing our debt much better, more than we expected. It had nothing to do with what they did. It's just that our gross domestic product was much, much more. And even the debt had increased by $2 billion. But of course, because we had made so much more, think of running a business. If you're making much more money and you owe a little bit more, when you look at how much of it represents your debt, it's going to be much less than it was the year before when you didn't make so much money. Simple maths, right? Then we look at what my co-host is reminding me of inflation. The other thing about inflation, we talked about it before. But one of the things you have to bear in mind, this is very worrying, and I think they play it down, and it really needs to be highlighted. When you see inflation going up, and this is what America I've said it before, is being challenged with. They're actually scratching their heads over it because what they're seeing is that the numbers of persons being employed is going way beyond what they anticipated. There's so much you can do in increasing the Fed rate. The reason being you want it to be more costly to borrow, more costly to buy a house, more costly to buy a car, more costly to do things, so that it will not have so much money circulating. And if you have more money circulating, people say, hey, I better open up a business, and open a business, and I better charge more because people have money. And so it goes, and so it goes, and so it goes. So hand in hand with high inflation is usually because the economy is doing well. We went through that period once when they talked about in 2008, when they talked about 10% slippery, we're going on a slippery slope. But look at this. When you look at our inflation figures for Trinidad and Tobago, when our economy was not doing well at all, at all. In fact, our fiscal deficit was negative 2. I'm going to start from 2014. The fiscal deficit was negative 2.4, negative 1.5, negative 5.0, negative 8.5, 8.4, negative 3.5. And in 2020, the whole world was really, except maybe Guyana, negative 11.5. So we know that the negative fiscal deficit did not start with COVID. That's to begin with, okay? We know it didn't start.
Yes.
Yeah, so stop blaming it on COVID, okay? That's number one. Number two, when you look at inflation, if your economy is not doing well, consumer confidence is not there, people are not spending. Before COVID, now after COVID, they're still not spending, they're being careful how they spend it because their salaries have not gone up. And guess what has gone up? Inflation. And guess what inflation is? It's your purchasing power. And guess in what area? In two key areas, food and in fuel. And I just want to make this one point. Dr. Roger Hossain, used as a base figure. He said that the food inflation between 2050 to 2022 has gone up by 45%. So you are working in 2015 for $4,000. And when you go in the grocery, 45% of the food that you are now purchasing for your family has gone up, the food has gone up by 45%. And then you have to pay for transportation, right? And so what we are seeing now is an economy that is flat, fiscal deficit that is really in a negative position. And do you know what the inflation rate was? In 2018 is 1%, 2019 1%, 2017 1.9%, 2020 0.6%, nobody's spending money. 2021, but you know what it was in 2022? 5.8%. And when it took out the food, it was over 8%. Do you understand that people are suffering in this country? And as someone said to me, you forget about people living in clap and board houses, middle class people whose salaries have not increased and who have to face a grocery, who have to put gas in their car and have to pay for these things. They are becoming part of the lower income group. Slowly but surely they are sliding into that.
Well, I would argue it's not so slow anymore.
It's not
the
so
way
slow.
Things are going.
But I think I was told to take a break,
Yes,
so I could go into
we have to take that break. When we can come back, Karen will continue.